the name of the Pentagon off the outside of it and go in and rescue the people that are in there.
Scott Graham, optimistic that there may be people to rescue. A lot others are not so optimistic. We have heard that bodies have been found here, apparently bodies from the plane and bodies also that are in that building. Back to you at Broadcast House.
Dave Statter at the Pentagon, thanks a lot. The plane that hit the Pentagon was American Airlines Flight 77, originated from Dulles International, headed to Los Angeles. It was carrying 64 people. All of them are believed to be dead.
Dozens of the injured have been treated at the Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington.
Our Jennifer Ryan is there now with the latest. Jennifer?
We're also here, of course, and hearing that Dr. York Allen is in the hospital. He's the chief of ER, trying to figure out what will happen tomorrow. Questions like, will the morgue be able to accommodate what is to come? As you can see behind me, there's not much going on right now. Not too many people coming in at this hour, but 42 injured have been brought here. 21 released. 14 admitted tonight, 9 of them in intensive care. Their injuries include broken bones, cuts, bruises, smoke inhalation, and also burns. An interesting fact that we learned about this evening, human skin from organ donors is making its way to the hospitals around this area, to the burn units. It's making its way here from Texas, 50 square feet of human skin for grafting, surgeries that these victims may need for severe burns. Blood donors have also packed centers around the country, good-hearted Americans who have been asked to donate and who have answered the call tonight. We're hearing at Inova Fairfax, their blood collection site on Woodburn is packed. They've got a 4-hour wait. They're asking people, though, do come tonight and through the night. They're open for 24 hours. They're looking for blood type O, the universal donor. 11 D.C. hospitals will get this blood, and if New York needs it, it will also get the blood. Usually it takes 24 to 48 hours to turn around a unit of blood. They're moving so quickly tonight, they say they can do it in 12 hours. That's the very latest. Back to you at Broadcast House.
Jennifer Ryan, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jennifer. 7 victims from today's Pentagon attack are being treated at Washington Hospital Center, all of them suffering burns.
10 others are being treated at Inova Alexandria Hospital. Here's the latest on closings for tomorrow. Federal workers are under the unscheduled leave policy.
The University of Maryland at College Park has canceled classes for tomorrow, but offices will be open. Montgomery County Public Schools will be closed tomorrow, but administrative offices will be open.
Fairfax County Public Schools will be closed tomorrow. However, offices will be open with liberal leave, and Falls Church City Public Schools will be closed tomorrow, and there will not be any daycare. District schools are also closed, but we're going to continue to update you on any closings that might happen, and those will show up on the bottom part of your TV screen. When it comes to transportation, Union Station is expected to be open tomorrow. Greyhound is offering limited bus service out of Washington, but not to New York. No word yet on what's going to happen tomorrow. A lot of people in our area have decided to gather in prayer tonight. More than 36 people attended a special service this evening at Metropolitan United Methodist Church on Nebraska Avenue. The United Methodist denomination has declared a nationwide prayer vigil over the next 2 days. We now rejoin a CBS News special report in progress.
Downtown to volunteer. These construction workers were from Iron Workers Local 40. What's the job in there?
Whatever it is, to save somebody, one person saved is a life saved.
Through the day, an inferno raged in World Trade Center Building Number 7, another massive office tower. Firefighters feared that it would collapse, and a little more than 8 hours after the attack, the abandoned building fell. 47 stories in the street. This is what's left of the carefully organized files and lives that were the World Trade Center. Bits of paper blasted into the street, construction dust 1 inch or 2 inches deep everywhere you look. What's eerie about this place now, several hours after the initial disaster, is just how quiet it is. You don't hear any ambulances racing away from the World Trade Center anymore.
I saw many injuries.
Hundreds, thousands.
My eyesight did not see hundreds and thousands. I know that my heart and my brain tells me they were hundreds.
We spoke to some firefighters earlier today near the scene of the World Trade Center towers. They told us that they were under the towers when they began to fall, and as they looked up and saw the buildings coming down on top of them, they glanced over their shoulders and saw the entrance to a subway station. They threw themselves down the stairs of the subway. The building collapsed. These firefighters told us they dug themselves out of the subway and went back to work. We talked to those firefighters at the base of World Trade Center Building Number 7. We left them there 1 hour before that building collapsed. We don't know whether they escaped a second time. Dan?
Scott Pelley, we know that building number 5 in the World Trade Center complex had the 2 twin towers. They're gone. Building number 7 is gone. But building number 5 was reported hours ago as teetering on the brink of collapse. Any late word on that building, which in most cities would be the tallest building in town?
Dan, that building was thoroughly involved in fire when we were down there a couple of hours ago. Firefighters have been virtually helpless to try to drive these fires back because of the magnitude of what is happening, the glass that is continually falling on top of them in the street. We don't know the disposition of World Trade Center building number 5 at this hour, but much of it was blown away. It is difficult to imagine how it could ever survive. It will probably have to be raised at some point.
Scott Pelley live on the lower tip of Manhattan. There are indications that many, many people were literally buried alive in the collapse of the buildings today. Some people are still believed to be alive in the rubble. But rescue workers, firefighters, police, and others, for a long period of time, could not get anywhere near them to determine how many people might still be alive. As of about 7 o'clock New York time tonight, rescue workers were beginning to go into the very heart of the destruction. And by, say, dawn tomorrow, perhaps before, we'll have some reports on whether they found anybody alive in the rubble. Now, we want to give you a moment-by-moment look at how the attack on America unfolded. And correspondent Russ Mitchell gives us that.
It's early this Tuesday morning, the 11th of September, 2001.
It began as a shimmering late summer day.
WCBS News Time 8:48. It's traffic and weather together. Tom Kaminsky, Chopper 880.
All right, Pat, we are just currently getting a look at the World Trade Center. We have something that has happened here at the World Trade Center.
And within half an hour, became America's second Pearl Harbor.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended.
By now, you've seen the pictures, but it's been a long, agonizing, and confusing 12 hours.
Oh, it was chaos. It's something out of a movie.
So briefly, here's what we know about exactly what happened. 8:48 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11, hijacked en route from Boston to Los Angeles, slams into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, 2/3 of the way up the 110-story building.
We had seen a fireball, and I can tell you it appears as though something has gone into the World Trade Center.
20 minutes later, at 9:08 a.m., a United Airlines flight, number 175, also from Boston to Los Angeles, tips its wings and crashes into the South Tower.
Oh, my God! Oh, my God!
An incredible fireball, so remarkable, it didn't even seem real.
Looked like a plane rammed into the second building.
35 minutes after that, 9:43 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77, scheduled to fly to Los Angeles from Dulles Airport outside Washington, dives into the Pentagon, destroying one of the building's 5 sides.
I happened to hear a plane come through. It sounded like it was running normal.
10:10 a.m., the 4th hijacked plane, United 93 from Newark to San Francisco, crashes in a remote area 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh.
It just come down like it was going to land, but instead of landing, it just went nose straight into the ground.
In a little more than an hour, 4 horrific plane crashes, hundreds believed dead. But far worse was yet to come. At 10:05 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center, possibly weakened beyond hope by the plane's impact, collapses. People can be seen jumping from the high floors.
The building came just rumbling down. It was like a war zone.
10:28 a.m. and the North Tower, choked with smoke and flames from its upper floors, disintegrates. Smoke and ash from the destruction combined to make parts of New York City look like ancient Pompeii after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Rescue firemen were coated with thick white dust.
This is terrible. We lost tons of guys. We lost tons of guys.
Cars were under blankets of ash. Rescuers were just happy to be alive. As for the death toll, even tonight there were no hard numbers. But New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani feared it might extend into the thousands. Half a world away, there was a far different reaction. Gunmen appearing to applaud today's terrorism. But Palestine Liberation Organization leader Yasser Arafat did not join in.
We are completely shocked. Completely shocked.
In Afghanistan, a spokesman for the ruling Taliban, who provides sanctuary for terrorist leader Osama bin Laden, said he could not have been behind the attack.
Everybody out! Everybody out!
Back home, it was as if war had been declared.
Ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families.
President Bush spoke to the nation, first briefly in Florida, and later from a military base in Louisiana.
The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
Then, heading to another military base outside Omaha.
The airport's being evacuated. They need to go home.
All international flights into the U.S. were diverted to Canada. The FAA stopped every single commercial airplane flight for the first time ever. And terrorism experts made it a point to remind everyone that tomorrow had been set as a sentencing date for an associate of Osama bin Laden for his role in the 1988 bombing of the American embassy in Tanzania. That sentencing had been set for a federal courthouse near the World Trade Center. As the day ended in New York City, another skyscraper in the World Trade Center complex crumbled. Building number 7, 47 stories high. And tonight, while smoke from the collapse of the Twin Towers still lingered over New York City, most who saw and survived this day still had trouble believing what they saw. The phrase you heard over and over again was, "It seemed just like a movie."
Rush Mitchell. In Washington, the nerve center of the U.S. military sustained its own swift attack. David Martin, our national security correspondent, has details about what happened at the Pentagon and how the U.S. military might retaliate when retaliation is deemed appropriate. David?
Dan, 12 hours after the attack, fires are still burning, although Pentagon officials say the flames are under control and the Pentagon will be open for business tomorrow. We now have new close-up pictures of the damage done by that plane, and Defense Secretary Rumsfeld had a grim warning that casualties will be high.
People have been lifted out and taken away in ambulances, and the numbers will be calculated, and it will not be a few.
The first attack ever on the Pentagon occurred at 9:38 a.m. Eastern Time.
Clipped this pole over here, hit another pole and slammed right into the building. Huge explosion, and then utter pandemonium, as you might imagine. I mean, everybody was screaming, "Oh my God."
A hijacked American Airlines jet, which had just taken off from Dulles Airport, flew right up the main highway leading north into Washington and straight into the citadel of American military power.
There was no doubt about it. It was American Airlines slammed right into the building, and there was no doubt about it. Whoever was piloting that plane was aiming for the Pentagon.
Fearful that, like the World Trade Center, a second airliner was on its way, most of the building's 23,000 workers fled.
Plane's coming in. Come on. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. We're not playing around here. Let's go.
F-16 fighters circled overhead looking for a second attack, but the damage had already been done. The plane had drilled a hole about a third of the way through the world's largest office building. The wounded were rushed to nearby hospitals as the fire spread and an entire section of the building collapsed, trapping many, many more inside.
Arlington search and rescue personnel are just now, and it's about almost 2 o'clock, just now gaining access to portions of the building where the plane hit because the fires were too intense.
One ray of hope. The Pentagon is undergoing a major renovation, and some of the offices in the path of the plane were vacant.
We're trying to find out who made it out okay and account for the people that may not have made it out.
When the plane hit, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld moved from his office on the other side of the building into the National Military Command Center in the basement. With smoke hanging in the air, he ordered aircraft carriers, amphibious ships, cruisers, and destroyers to New York and Washington, where they can serve as floating hospitals, help with the cleanup, and provide air defense against the possibility of more attacks. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs made a clear threat of military retaliation.
and I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
Right now, suspicion focuses on Osama bin Laden, but first things first. The FBI is combing the wreckage for evidence, and all U.S. military bases and embassies are at the highest state of alert. Dan?
David Martin reporting again live from the Pentagon. President Bush today called it, quote, a national tragedy, and the president vowed to, quote, hunt down and punish those responsible for the attacks. And there are already indications of who, or at least some of the who may have been behind them. More on that, we turn to Jim Stewart in Washington. Jim?
Dan, it didn't take long, and it's unclear whether it will lead to anything, but federal investigators are on the move tonight, serving search warrants and questioning potential accomplices to these attacks. Sources say the first concrete tips were picked up from a study of the flight manifest aboard the doomed aircraft. At least one search, we're being told, is in the Miami area. Meanwhile, intelligence officials say they have now picked up what one official calls significant indicators that the suicide planes were hijacked by members of Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group that reports to Osama bin Laden. Sources describe the intelligence as communications intercepts and said they're not definitive, but they are persuasive. Sensing that bin Laden would quickly become a suspect, Afghanistan's ruling Taliban party, which has been giving him safe refuge, called a press conference. We do not allow Osama bin Laden to operate from our land, the Taliban said, warning the U.S. not to take any, quote, speedy actions to retaliate. Slowly, FBI evidence teams are starting to piece together what happened on the aircraft and zeroing in on how the terrorists pulled off the hijackings. Attorney General John Ashcroft provided one insight when he said that the hijackers of one of the aircraft had apparently sneaked knives through airport security.
American Airlines Flight 11 departed Boston for Los Angeles, hijacked by suspects armed with knives. This plane crashed into the World Trade Center.
Within minutes of today's attacks, officials were pointing to the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center by a group with ties to bin Laden, citing it as proof that bin Laden has never given up on his dream to destroy the symbol of America's economic power. And in recent months, analysts say bin Laden has only become more and more sophisticated in his attempts to strike at the United States. They point specifically to his simultaneous attack on 2 U.S. embassies in East Africa.
They also went directly against a U.S. destroyer, which was heavily guarded, and they did put a hole in that ship, the USS Cole. So they have a track record of conducting attacks that one would think they might not be capable of.
Late today, the U.S. intelligence community was rapidly sorting through a priority list of potential suspects within the U.S. for electronic eavesdropping, with sources saying the number may reach into the hundreds. Some of the very doomed passengers themselves may have provided authorities with their first valuable tips. In panic desperation, some of the passengers, including, we're told, the wife of U.S. Solicitor General Ted Olson, called from a cell phone to say their plane had been hijacked. Another passenger called from the restroom at the rear of another aircraft. One passenger, it has been suggested, provided detailed information about one of the hijackers. The working theory by lawmen so far is that the hijackers were pilots themselves and forcefully took over the controls to dive their jets straight into the targets. Dan?
Jim Stewart, live in our Washington Bureau. Join us now again for perspective and context on this. Former U.S. National Security Advisor Sandy Berger, who was in fact the National Security Advisor for 8 years straight through. Sandy Berger, question. There was a time, my recollection, in the 1980s, possibly the late 1970s, when the United States put aboard aircraft skyjack protection specialists in civilian clothes. Now that was ended. Was any thought given while you were the National Security Advisor to reinstituting that for protection aboard airliners?
Not as far as I know. We had, as you remember, Dan, a spate of hijackings during the 70s and 80s. The United States intensified its airport security and essentially has had a grip on that problem for the past 10 years. We've had very little of this activity.
Past tense now.
And one of the things that is so staggering about today is that in 4 separate instances, people were able to get aboard planes and circumvent the security system that has worked so well for 10 years.
Sandy Berger, you said it earlier, and I want to emphasize it again now. Our main focus tonight is on those people dead, missing, wounded, and their families. But as a former National Security Council advisor until very recently, and one of our ranking experts, I want to expand this conversation out. There's a lot of talk now of a "we will retaliate," and Senator Orrin Hatch said tonight, well, our intelligence operatives have some indications that there are links to Osama bin Laden. There's talk about, well, the Taliban in Afghanistan better dig deeper, in effect, because if it turns out Osama bin Laden did it, the Taliban's been protecting him, hiding him within their country, then he better look out. But talk to us realistically about the whole subcontinent. Both Pakistan and India are nuclear powers now. Pakistan right on the border with Afghanistan. All of this by way of saying, if it's ever decided that Osama bin Laden was responsible for this and he's still in Afghanistan, there are no easy answers about how to get him, how to retaliate.
Well, I think that's an important point, Dan. Of course, let me repeat your caveat. We don't know. America proceeds on facts, not on speculation. So, number one, we have to determine what has happened here. But we're talking, if we are talking about bin Laden, about a very difficult target. This is far from nowhere, in very rough terrain. And I don't believe this is now, given the escalation that we've seen today of monumental proportions, susceptible of being dealt with in one pop, in one sort of exquisite act. This may require the administration to look at a range of options, from economic pressure to military options that go beyond simply missiles from afar.
Very quickly, Sandy Berger, because we don't have much time left in this particular segment. Can we or can we not absolutely count on the government, now a new government in Pakistan, to help with this new problem?
Well, the government of Pakistan has been cooperative in some respects on terrorism. They have turned over several operatives of bin Laden, but you also have to understand that the ties between the Pakistani intelligence and military and the Taliban and bin Laden's operations are quite intermingled. And the extent to which the Pakistanis will cooperate, I think if we needed that cooperation, remains to be seen.
Fair to say, open to questions. Sandy Berger, yes. Thank you very much again for being with us. Now, one question at the very heart of today's attacks is how, with so much security, alleged and otherwise, at America's airports, how did these hijackings happen? Bob Orr has been looking for some answers. Bob?
Well, Dan, there's some evidence tonight that the hijackers of at least 2 of the 4 jetliners involved in today's attack used knives to overpower flight attendants and then take control of the cockpits. It obviously was all part of a highly coordinated strike with simultaneous breaches of security at 3 of the nation's busiest airports during the hectic morning rush hour. And the jets targeted belonged to American Airlines and United Airlines, 2 of the most powerful symbols of U.S. aviation.
American Flight 11, a Boeing 767, took off first at 7:45 this morning from Boston bound for Los Angeles. 13 minutes later, another 767, United Flight 175, also left Boston for L.A. At virtually the same moment, United Flight 93, a 757, took off from Newark for San Francisco. And to the south at Washington's Dulles Airport, another 757, American Flight 77, flew off towards Los Angeles. The first sign that anything was wrong was noticed by air traffic controllers, who watched the jets stray from their planned routes. This computerized radar path shows how the first plane, American Airlines Flight 11, climbed out of Boston and, as expected, headed northwest across Massachusetts. But watch what happened. As the plane entered eastern New York, it turned sharply to the south and headed straight for Manhattan. The 767 hit the World Trade Center at 8:48 this morning. And 16 minutes later, United Flight 175 delivered the second blow. The jets, fueled for cross-country flights, were filled with tens of thousands of gallons of volatile fuel. They were literally flying bombs, each with an explosive power far greater than the blast that leveled the Oklahoma City Federal Building. Based on radio communications from the planes, FAA authorities knew they were dealing with a terrorist attack and immediately moved to close New York and Washington airports. And for the first time in U.S. history, all flights across the country were grounded.
The airport's being evacuated. The I need to go home.
But there were still 2 hijacked jets in the air, and one of them, American Airlines Flight 77, took aim on the Pentagon. It crashed in a fireball at 9:38. Meanwhile, the 4th plane, the flight from Newark to San Francisco, was heading west, and it traveled all the way into northeastern Ohio. The controllers monitoring radar watched as the jet then did a U-turn and headed back towards the East Coast. At 10:20, 2.5 hours after the 4-pronged attack was launched, the plane crashed in a rural Pennsylvania field.
I happened to hear a plane come through. It sounded like it was running normal. When it come down over top of me, I seen it go nosedive straight into the ground down here. Everything was running fine on the plane, it sounded like.
Authorities now say tonight 285 people, it seems, died aboard the airliners. And tonight all flights remain grounded all across the country. Now, the FAA officials say they may reopen the national airspace tomorrow afternoon, but then again they may not. In any case, when the flights do resume, we're told we'll see an unprecedented level of security for U.S. aviation. But even then, it will not be an aviation system that's very well equipped to prevent suicide attacks. Dan?
Bob Orr live in Washington. 285 now, the number of people aboard the hijacked planes and presumed dead. Dateline Tokyo, stocks in Tokyo plunged early Wednesday morning. Traders dumped shares at least partially, if not mostly, in reaction to the terrorist attacks. And Dateline New York City at this hour, a story that will make your spine tingle and the hair raise up on the back of your neck. Authorities say a Munhall, Pennsylvania woman called 911 shortly before 8 p.m. tonight, New York time, saying her brother was, quote, still trapped under 40 feet of rubble near the Forward Hotel in Manhattan. That's in the area where the World Trade Center's buildings collapsed. The 911 coordinator says the victim told his sister he was still trapped under the World Trade Center wreckage. He gave specific directions to where he was located and said he was there with 2 New York City police sergeants and was calling for help. They declined to release the name of the woman, and authorities in New York said they are aware of this report of survivors. Can they get to them in the rubble where they are buried? And if so, can they get to them soon enough? A reminder, you are watching continuing CBS News coverage of the attack on America. Now, we'll be back after a little bit. We'll give you that break for our stations up and down the line, and we'll give another break shortly on. During this minute, let us say to you that we know that there are 285 people aboard the hijacked planes. The belief is they are dead. The numbers of dead in the World Trade Center disaster area, unknown, and it may be unknown for days, although Mayor Rudolph Giuliani has said from mid-morning that we should be prepared for very large casualties. A union firefighters official said that perhaps as many as 200 firefighters may be dead, because many of them rushed to the scene immediately when the first plane cracked into the first World Trade Center building. And, well, his speculation was that as many as 200 may be dead. Unquestionably, some New York police and firefighters have lost their lives. We know not how many. At last report, dozens of New York City police officers were missing. Now, again, a reminder for our stations, you're watching continuing CBS News coverage of the attack on America. Back now at CBS News World Headquarters in New York. CBS's special coverage of the attack on America continues, as it will throughout the evening and early morning and into tomorrow. The headlines at this hour. Addressing the nation from the White House tonight, President Bush said thousands of lives were suddenly ended, unquote, in the multiple terror attacks in New York City, the nation's capital, and Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon included on that list. President Bush said bluntly, the United States will not distinguish between the terrorists who actually committed the acts and what he called those who harbor them. He did not indicate that he knows or anybody knows who committed the attacks, or for that matter, who harbored them. Here in New York City, the desperate search for victims runs on into the night. At the site where 2 hijacked commercial U.S. jetliners were used to ram the twin towers of the World Trade Center. Both towers, where approximately 50,000 people work on the average day, collapsed. A third building in the tower complex, a 47-story building, collapsed there later in the day. President Bush says the death toll is in the thousands. A third hijacked jetliner crashed into the Pentagon, and a fourth hijacked jetliner, possibly being diverted to the Washington area, came down in southwestern Pennsylvania, about 80 miles from Pittsburgh. All told, 285 is the revised upward number of dead on the hijacked planes alone. The FAA has ordered an unprecedented shutdown of air traffic nationwide at least through noon tomorrow. The U.S. military is on worldwide alert. The nation's capital was stunned by the attacks. Government offices were closed and evacuated, but there is every effort being made to show now that the government is still up and running, as Bob Schieffer reports to us now. Bob?
Well, Dan, like the other public buildings here in Washington, the Capitol was shut down today, the workers were sent home, and the congressional leaders, in a security measure that has never been used before, were helicoptered away to a secure location. But tonight, in an incredible show of bipartisan resolve, hundreds of members of Congress gathered on the steps of the Capitol to say these acts of terrorism will not stand, the government will continue to operate, and Congress will continue to function, and that the two parties will come together to support the president.
When America suffers, and when people perpetrate acts against this country, we as a Congress and as a government stand united. And we stand together. We will speak with one voice to condemn these attacks, to comfort the victims and their families, to commit our full support to the effort to bring those responsible to justice.
It was a kind of thing seldom seen here, and in a touching close, they literally sang the praises of their country.
God bless America, my home, sweet home.
A very different scene than we saw at the Congress and at the Capitol last week. Tonight, Dan, all those arguments about who lost the surplus didn't seem very important anymore. This is a Congress now that is going to settle down to business. I think tomorrow you'll see them back in session, passing a very strong resolution of support of the president, determined to find who caused this and to see that there is appropriate punishment. Dan.
Bob Schieffer reporting live from Washington with the White House in the background. Here tonight with his analysis and to help give us some context and perspective is the former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, a former Assistant Secretary of State of the United States of America, and one of the United States' most experienced diplomats, both in Asia, Europe, and other places abroad, including Africa, Richard Holbrooke. Mr. Ambassador, thanks for being with us. You've thought about this today. What are the most important things for Americans to have in mind as we steady ourselves and prepare for the long trail back from this day of infamy?
Well, after we get through recognizing the first fundamental thing, which is this terrible loss of life here in New York among policemen and firemen and citizens, and rallying, as so many people have said today, I think we have to look to the future. And on that point, Dan, let me emphasize the most important sentence in President Bush's speech, when he said we will make no distinction between those who committed the act and those who harbor those who committed it. That is the beginning of an essential change in the rules. Let us say, for sake of argument, that it was Osama bin Laden, as everyone thinks, although there's no proof at this point. If it was Osama bin Laden, then the Taliban, who have harbored him, must be regarded as equally responsible for what can only be described as an act of war against the mainland of the United States. And I think there will be consequences. Point number two. In order for those consequences to be successful, to strike at the heart of the people who did this, we will need allies. We will need our NATO allies. We will need the Russians and the Chinese to play their part. Each country has played games in the past, as you well know and as you've reported many times. And you yourself have been in Afghanistan, so you have a unique understanding of what the situation on the ground there is like. And in addition, we will need the support of moderate Arab countries like Egypt and Jordan and others, who are going to have to abandon any pan-Arab solidarity in favor of demonstrating that they will not tolerate an act of war in the United States.
Richard Holbrook, you know the history better than I. That great powers have made efforts to militarily move in Afghanistan. Great Britain in the 19th century, the Soviet Union in the 20th century. Is it or is it not a nightmare scenario that we get unimpeachable evidence that Osama bin Laden was connected to this, and unimpeachable evidence is in Afghanistan, to take on Afghanistan, to talk about retaliation in that terrible, in many ways, nightmarish place? I mean, what can one say about that?
It is a nightmare scenario, and it's going to be incredibly difficult. But there's something else that all Americans must remember tonight if we talk about history, and the rest of the world should remember too, and that when America's resolve is there, when Americans are united, as we were on December 7th, 1941, after Pearl Harbor, and this is certainly comparable to Pearl Harbor, and the death toll is going to be much higher, I'm afraid, than the 2,000 sailors and seamen who died at Pearl Harbor. When the United States is united, and when we rally international support behind us, we have always prevailed, and I have no doubt we will prevail here. But there will be consequences. The world is going to change, from small things like changes in airport security, which are going to inconvenience all Americans, to big things like our mindset and our international leadership. This will not be a day like others. The world will change because of what has happened today, after we dig through the debris and save the people who are still fighting for their lives in Lower Manhattan.
Richard Holbrook, thank you. As the scope of this tragedy widened, the Red Cross today issued repeated pleas for volunteers and blood donors. As you may know, there's a shortage of blood plasma practically all over the world and in most places in the United States, and that includes New York City. Aaron Moriarty reports now on how New York City, in terms of this need for blood, literally rolled up its sleeves.
I turned on the TV and it was a horror show. It's like World War III.
I keep on telling people that I think I'm going to wake up and it's going to be a bad dream. It's going to be a bad dream. And, you know, when you think about all the things that have gone on in our lives, this could be the worst.
First thing that came to my mind is this is war. You know, it's obviously an act of aggression. It's obviously very well organized.
I see a plane falling from the sky. Right in, yeah! All of a sudden you hear an explosion, and then you could see the building starting to collapse, and then everybody runs up the street.
The still billowing smoke is a reminder of just how profoundly changed this city is today. Schools, offices, and stores are all closed. There's no traffic or noise anywhere, not even here on Fifth Avenue. But if the city seems very different today, so do the people who live here.
The people who are here for the blood drive are to stay in their seats in the lobby.
New Yorkers didn't mind getting in long lines today or giving something away, their blood.
I work right down the block, and this is the best thing that we could do to help people out. You know, with tragedy, my brother's a fireman, he's down there. So at this point, I think Americans can just get together and, you know, with this such a tragic situation, what else can you do but maybe hopefully save somebody's life by giving blood?
Why are you here? Dill Zeidman came when she realized she couldn't do anything else to help a friend.
A friend of mine worked in the World Trade Center, and that's why I'm here. This is personal.
Elizabeth Whelan and her daughter Christine feared they lost a husband and a father.
My husband works in the World Trade Center and into World Trade Center, and this morning, because he was going to vote, he decided to jog before he went to work. So on my way to work, I saw him jogging outside my office here at 68th and Broadway. So when I got up and heard the news, I knew that he was safe. But my daughter, who lives...
I had no idea. I was watching television as the second plane went into World Trade Center. And it was 9 in the morning, so I thought my father was at work. I was frantically calling, hearing his voice on voicemail, and I had no idea whether he was alive or dead.
Still a little in shock, they are feeling very, very lucky.
We were standing there hugging each other, watching those buildings go down from our apartment building, and it was just the most terrifying thing because he could have been there, he should have been there. It was just a minor miracle he wasn't.
No one knows exactly how much blood will be needed. Linda Levi of the New York Blood Center.
So our inventory was actually pretty good this week.
When you say that, how many days under normal circumstances?
We typically like to have at least 5 days of every blood type available, and with that we have a comfortable blood inventory. But an emergency that happened today, that could be gone in a day or even less.
When the second explosion occurred, everything went dark.
Despite the confusion, despite a wait that often stretched for hours,
Would like to volunteer for the American Red Cross.
there were no complaining New Yorkers. The only harsh words were for those behind the terrorist acts.
They've declared war on the United States.
Because they've got a nation of 300 million people that are very, very angry at whoever wants to step up and take credit.
It may take weeks for the full impact of today's tragedy to sink in.
My husband is sitting there contemplating that he has no law practice, that for 30 years he's been going to an office that doesn't exist anymore. And I don't know how he's going to cope with it. I don't know how anyone can cope. I can't believe it.
Let's pray. Lord our God, you are always faithful and quick to show mercy. Our brothers and sisters were suddenly and violently taken from us.
Which explains one other popular place today, St. Patrick's Cathedral. So many people went to the centers to donate blood that in some places the wait was 7 hours long, and for that reason the New York Blood Center is now asking only people with type O blood, either positive or negative, to go tomorrow.